Hey, welcome back. Nadine here, and I'm doing another What's the Facts video. This time I want to talk about our elections. I want to talk about how my ballot gets from my hot little hands into the ballot box. There are a lot of concerns being raised, and some of them I have just kind of blown off like, you know what, that's just such bullshit. There's no problems. Everybody is, freaking out about nothing. If it was a problem, it would have been brought up before now. Funny that this stuff wasn't, we weren't looking at elections being a problem or being tampered with when we actually had government agencies bringing reports to certain people saying, hey, there's a problem. That was treated as nothing. And now we have no reports of major fraud happening, yet we have huge accusations, being thrown about and undermining our confidence in our own electoral process. And so my assumption was that, look, there's no problem and there's no need for concern. This is just about political posturing and, trying to create a narrative in order to support an agenda to come. And then I had to ask myself, well, where's the proof of that? Where's your data? And I didn't have any because I haven't done it. So I did a little bit, not as much as I would like to because I've been really busy this month. I've been out of town a lot. There's just a lot of things going on. And so I didn't get to do the digging that I usually would like to, but I did do some, and I'd like to share that with you. So if you'd like to hear, please stay tuned. We're going to get into it. If you haven't, please subscribe if you feel like you would like to see when other videos come out. And thank you for the new people that have subscribed. I do have a couple of people there, so that means I'm not talking to myself anymore, which is pretty cool. All right, so let's get into the video, and we're going to start with ballot harvesting. So, what were your first thoughts when you heard the term ballot harvesting? I mean, I personally felt like it sounded terrible. I thought it sounded shady, basically. And the funny thing is that the term ballot harvesting was actually created to shade an actual legal process. At least when, in the states that it's allowed, it's a legal process and it's completely above board, at least in theory. So, ballot harvesting is also known as ballot collecting and third party ballot return. It just basically means that if you can't get your ballot to the ballot box, you can give it to somebody that you trust and they'll take it to the ballot box for you. Now, in some states, there are requirements that the person has to be a relative. So, in different states, of course, because states get to make their own rules on a lot of things, and elections are one of them. They get to decide how they make provisions for their, eligible voters to be able to vote. And so I was really surprised to learn that 26 out of our 50 states do allow a trusted person to pick up a ballot from somebody and return it to the ballot box for them. Now, if you stop there, if that's where you end the story, well, other people can take other people's ballots and put them in the ballot box, then you're not telling the whole story. And if you just stop there, then I'm realizing that a scenario has been created that makes me think, well, that doesn't sound very safe. That doesn't sound very secure. Most states, at least from what I saw, and there is a link in the description box where you can go and see what kind of requirements they have for these types of actions. But most states have you have to show your ID, you have to identify yourself, you have to sign an affidavit or, sign your name or you have to give something to the polling place in order for them to trace who dropped that ballot off. So later on, that can become very handy if, let's say, there's some question about the election, which there has been. There are some checks and balances, and I didn't really even know that. I mean, there's definitely not a way for somebody to just take in an armful or car full of ballots and just drop them off and be like, later, see ya, good luck with that. I mean, it's not going to happen that way because there are requirements. So one of the pros for ballot collection or third-party ballot return is that it helps people who can't get to the poll be able to return their ballot to a polling place. It basically makes it make people who live in remote areas or who lack ready access to transportation or are incapacitated, like they're in a hospital or they're in jail or they're in a rehab or something of the sort. It helps them be able to get their vote in, because the question is that are our policies making it easy for a voter to get their ballot from their hand to the ballot box, or are there burdens and being put on the voter and hurdles and obstacles being put in the path on the way to the ballot box? If there are hurdles and obstacles put in the path between the voter and the ballot box, that's called voter suppression, which a state is actually entrusted and tasked with the job of making voting accessible to everyone, regardless of age, race, gender, political affiliation, or any of that. As long as you're 18 years old or older and are a U.S. citizen and you're not a convicted felon, you are eligible to vote in the United States. So anything that puts more of a burden other than being a citizen, not being a felon, and being 18 years or older on a voter, then that's voter suppression. And so I had to kind of like realize that there are times where I felt like there are policies that people have talked about that sound reasonable, like a voter fee or voter ID. Well, the reason that people are against that is because where it seems like it's not a big deal, actually for some of us, it is a big deal. And I have to think in that bigger picture way when we're talking about voting and making it accessible to everybody that's eligible to vote. I think it's important to kind of like get in the mindset of understanding that we need to not have anything between the voter and the ballot box unless it's absolutely necessary. Because anything between the voter and the ballot box is an encumbrance. It's an undue burden. It's an obstacle. And any of those things are considered voter suppression because it suppresses a person's ability to carry out their right to be able to vote. I want to move on to mail-in voting. Okay, mail-in voting facts. Mail-in voting is not new. The biggest example, and I think when it was really put into play, was during the Civil War. That was a hugely important election, obviously. And so the soldiers were able to vote that way. And so it's not brand new. That was a little fact I was unaware of. Also, there's not really a difference between an absentee ballot and a mail-in ballot as far as the ballot itself is concerned and what kind of checks and balances it goes through to be determined if it's a legitimate ballot or not. The only difference between an absentee ballot and a mail-in ballot is an absentee ballot is requested. Some states have requirements of what is a legitimate excuse to request an absentee ballot. And some states are considered no excuse states. You don't have to have an excuse. You can just request the ballot and you get the absentee ballot. The mail-in ballots are automatically mailed to all registered voters, and so you don't request it. It's automatically sent to you because you have your correct address on file and you're a registered voter. That's the only difference. After that, those ballots get treated the same way as, each other. They're official ballots and they go through the checks and balances any other ballot goes through. So that was interesting. I thought that there must be some kind of difference because mail-in voting has been targeted in such a way as far as like being made to look so problematic that it can't possibly be safe, and But the truth is that technically every one of us could vote by mail, even if our state didn't make a provision for it, because everybody has a right to request an absentee ballot. And so mail-in voting is the same. So there really isn't a way to say that it's like some kind of unicorn that shouldn't exist, because it already kind of does exist. It's just existing on a bigger scale now because we're in a pandemic and we need to make provisions for people who otherwise would not be able to vote without being able to vote by mail because of a pandemic. So again, it's the mindset. Are we trying to make voting more accessible and easier, or are we trying to uphold a status quo, even if that status quo is putting an obstacle between the voter and the voting box? Because if you're putting that obstacle there, that's voter suppression. And it's that simple. Like, that is the biggest takeaway I have from this, is it's that simple. But there's a lot of dancing around about, that. And that's where we have to be vigilant in being good citizens and protecting not only our own rights to vote, but the rights of other people to vote. And when we see that being played with, we should be standing up to it and saying, no, that's not okay. Because it's happening, especially since 2013, when the Voting Acts bill changed, and states don't have to have clearance from the Attorney General for changes that they're implementing. The Voting Rights Act is extremely important, and we need to keep our eye on it as parts of it are whittled away. Because I think it's interesting that things in place to protect people of color are always in danger of being weakened and then eventually done away with. It's like always in a state of being chipped away at rather than built upon. Why is that? I think we should ask ourselves, why do we do that? And why in the world would we remove provisions that protect a people that have been obviously, blatantly, and proven to be discriminated against without those protections? So now states can do whatever they want as far as discriminating and creating laws that discriminate against anybody or any demographic or any set of people that they want, and there's no oversight. That's very dangerous, and I think that we really, really need to be aware of that. One thing that I learned is that there are states that are already doing mail-in voting. Those states are Colorado. They've been doing it since 2013. Hawaii's been doing it since the primary election of this year. Oregon has been doing it since 1998. Utah since 2013. But Utah is not statewide. Utah lets counties decide on their own if they want to use mail-in voting. So as of 2018, 27 of 29 counties have opted into a vote-by-mail system, and Washington has been doing it since 2011. Actually, they've been doing it before then, but they officially adopted it in 2011. So I was totally shocked about that. I was like, oh my God, because really, honestly, it seemed like this is something that just popped up on the screen and it's just causing all this mayhem and craziness. But the reality is that there are states that have been using a vote by mail system and have been doing fine. And so that kind of makes me feel like this is a little more stable than it's being represented as by some people. The states that have implemented a vote by mail system recently because of the pandemic are California, Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Idaho, Illinois, Iowa, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. So those states have said, you know what, this is going to be really hard for people that have concerns about, being all up on people's necks, getting in line, going voting, using voting machines or whatever during this pandemic. And so we need to make provisions to assure that they can vote in spite of those concerns that they have and the precautions that they need to take. So those states have implemented a vote by mail system. Now, I understand that there's people that are like, there's no pandemic and there's no reason for any of that to happen. And honestly, I'm not speaking to you because you've already made up your minds about that. And so we're not going to get into that argument. If you really want to look at what I have to say about it, then, I have a video about the coronavirus because I really wanted to know, is it just the flu and it's no big deal? And so I kind of dug into that. And so feel free to watch that video. It's kind of long. I'm thinking about cutting it down, but it had some good information. I learned some things. Um, Voting fraud through absentee or mail-in voting. This is another interesting fact that I found out. In the past 20 years, over 250 million votes have been cast by mail. This is just the mail voting. And only 1,285 proven cases in the last 20 years of fraud have happened. So 250 million votes by mail and only 1,285 proven cases of voter fraud and 1,100 convictions. So that averages out to 64 proven cases per year of voter fraud. That's not enough to make a dent, especially in a presidential election. You have to have an incredible amount of ballots that have been fraudulently submitted and have gotten past all of the gatekeeping and checks and balances that happen to a ballot on a massive scale. Like, I realized that and I was like, oh my God, like, sure, anything's possible. And I'm sure if enough people put their heads together, something like that could happen. And for them to not raise red flags and cause an investigation with votes of that magnitude is just not feasible. And especially when I looked at what happened in North Carolina. Recently, North Carolina, let me go over what happened in North Carolina real quick. Okay, so North Carolina, Mr. Dowless was charged with 2 counts of felony obstruction of justice, perjury, solicitation to commit perjury, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and illegal possession of absentee ballots, according to a statement by Wake County District Attorney. So he was convicted, and one of the ways he was convicted was that after the votes were in, analysis of the votes and the voting patterns and different things that are looked at after an election showed that the numbers were a little off, and which meant that we need to look into this more. And once you start digging and you start, connecting the dots of who brought in the votes and how they got there, and the interesting thing, it was the Republican who hired this guy and the Republican who was warned that this guy was problematic, but he didn't listen. And, there were some other red flags. So it's not a Democrat or Republican thing. And that's one thing that I always find is a red flag for myself, is whenever the narrative is being built solely around demonizing one party or the other, I kind of question it, because I know that, human behavior is human behavior and dishonesty is dishonesty. It's not a Republican or Democratic thing. Greed is not a Republican or Democratic thing. I mean, it's a human thing. It's a human failing. So it's an interesting illustration of both sides of the coin. So, claims made against mail-in voting that I wanted to kind of address. Mail ballots, this is a quote, mail ballots are very dangerous for this country because of cheaters. They go collect them. They are fraudulent in many cases. I think that because they're mail-in ballots, they are actually, ballots that are in an envelope in a mailbox, and that people can go and collect them. However, and at the outset of that statement, it seems like, yes, that can happen. But because the numbers of ballots that you would have to get and turn in would be huge. We're not talking about a little local election where, maybe 50 ballots would make a difference. For somebody to be able to steal that many and not have the alarms sound. I mean, it's like, no, that can't happen. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. One last fact I forgot to mention: President Trump cast his own vote by mail ballot in the Florida primaries by giving it to a third party to return, also known as ballot harvesting. Ballots will be printed and sent in by foreign countries. That was something that I was like, oh wow, that sounds feasible. I mean, countries have way more resources at hand than individuals do. I mean, I'm sure they possibly could. Well, Jennifer Morrell, an elections consultant and former election official in Utah and Colorado, stated that for such a plot to work for just a single ballot, an adversary would need to mimic everything perfectly, from the ballot size, style, and even the weight of the paper to the envelope it's mailed in, all of which often changes every election cycle and differs from county to county. Ballots are built unique for each election. Each jurisdiction will normally have dozens to hundreds of unique ballot styles. Proofs for each ballot style are reviewed and tested to ensure the ballot scanners will read those ballots and only those ballots. Even ballots created on that same system from a previous election cannot be read. So, for a foreign country to be able to counterfeit all these different ballots from different counties and states perfectly, that's like, again, it's kind of like on a scale that is not quite feasible. So, um, at a study done between 1996 and 2018, it showed that universal vote by mail does not appear to affect either party's share of the turnout. First of all, it showed that turnout went up. However, it didn't, even though more people voted, the percentage of Democrat to Republican pretty much stayed the same. It didn't give another one party an advantage over the other. So my thoughts. Technically, the ability to already vote by mail is already there for everyone. Um, and so it's kind of like, are we slashing at windmills here by this argument that mail-in voting is not to be trusted, because it's already kind of there and it has been for a long time. Um, but I do have a question on how are states equipping themselves for the huge increase in ballots. It concerns me that just a few couple of months ago, the new postal general decided this is a good time to take out sorting machines and mailboxes. Really? Because it kind of sounds very much like Georgia, who is deciding this is a good time to remove polling places. It's a great time right before the election. Let's reduce the access to polling places. Same thing, because our polling place for many of us this year is the mailbox. Well, I just find it to be a kind of an interesting coincidence, don't you, that this person yeah, there's a lot of coincidences there and a lot of questions I have about that, but I'm not going to get into that whole topic here. It is, though, something that I do feel we should be asking. Hey, states, how are you preparing for this? Um, and how are ballots from certain geographic locations that contain people that will most likely vote in a certain way being protected? Mainly, I'm saying that, obviously certain locations are deeply red or deeply blue. And because of that, somebody would know that has some nefarious, crappy agenda, could say, this is a great neighborhood for me to go collect ballots in and make sure that they don't get them and blah, 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 whatever, in order to keep them from being able to vote. How is that being protected? How are our fellow citizens being protected? Because I don't really care if you're voting red or blue or purple or yellow. You're a citizen, and I want to see your vote protected just as much as I want to see my vote protected. Because in my world, how I was taught, that is being a true patriot. It's not about protecting the people that look and vote and believe like me. It's about protecting all of us in the U.S. And if you are, not voting like me, but your vote is being suppressed or tampered with, then that's a problem for all of us. And I will stand with you to say that's not right. How are those ballots being protected from obviously red or blue areas? And have states had enough time to create such, safety measures? I can't walk away from this and say, no, there is no concern, because locally, definitely things could be influenced if somebody wanted to do such a thing, because the numbers are much smaller and the numbers needed to be able to sway a vote are smaller depending on where you live and how big the election is. So it could be easier. And that's something that states need to think about, and counties need to think about. But it is in such small numbers compared to the amount of votes that come in, that even though it's not non-existent, it isn't enough to uh, decide or screw up a presidential year election. But it has resulted in many convictions, and in local areas, it has resulted in overturned elections, several, quite a few. So locally, it's a concern, and we need to be aware of that. Heritage.org, there's a link where you can see all the cases of election fraud, and it's really interesting. Um, so those are my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Did you learn anything new? Do you have any different perspectives about any of this? How are you feeling about, voting? Is your state implementing mail-in voting? Are you voting by mail? I know for me, I get my ballot by mail, but I'm going to take it directly to the polling station and drop it into the ballot box myself. That's how I do it. How are you going to do it? And what are your concerns? Do you have more information you'd like to share with me? You think I didn't cover something? Let me know. Put a comment in the box. Let's get some discussion going. I mean, having subscribers is one thing. I got like 25 or something, but I'd like to hear from you, because that is the thing that makes me happy. It gets my, blood going, is when we can share ideas in a respectful way. Just remember, don't be a potato. Don't just sit and get fed. Let's go out and seek the information, so we can be informed and we can have good conversations with each other. Stay safe and be kind. Thanks for listening. Bye.